Hello everyone, welcome back to UK Liber TV. I'm very pleased to be joined by the eminent MEP, military historian, economic historian, and all-round excellent person, Mr. Godfrey Bloom. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Oh, nice to be on it again, Ross. Good to see you.
Excellent, thank you. So, well, with the news, UK news, I thought we'd start domestically. UK news seems to be dominated by the COVID inquiry at the moment then. So it seems like the context for the inquiry is a sort of reaction to what I see as the growing climate cult, growing cult of health and safety, misplaced faith in the science trademark, especially to defeat this virus. This inquiry to me seems really about not finding out what actually happened and how we allowed politicians to control our lives for 6 months, but essentially just ensuring the elite's vision of this, biosecurity state for future reference. So it's not derailed, but rather it becomes institutionalized and it can be re-implemented at any time. What are your initial reactions to the COVID inquiry then?
Well, I knew this was going to happen. What, of course, we should have had was a proper inquiry. And what we've had now is a sort of Sun headline kind of Piers Morgan inquiry, which has gone nowhere because it's so shallow and stupid. And it's about personalities all squabbling amongst themselves, so nobody's learning anything. What we should have had was an independent inquiry to cover the mistakes of lockdown, the ill-conceived notion of lockdown, the ill-conceived acceptance of it being referred to as a pandemic, which it never was, some very serious looks at the deaths from COVID and of COVID, which we all know were jiggered about with by government, and there were no autopsies. There was a complete abrogation of responsibility when it came to death certificates, and so many other things that should be covered. And it seems to me they're not covering any of this. All they're doing is a few people are saying, oh, well, the lockdown wasn't my idea, I was against it, from the Prime Minister with whom the buck is supposed to stop. And we were bullied by the scientists. And the scientists are saying we were bullied by the politicians. And of course, I think that the inquiry would also be good when we've seen all those clips of them with their masks, taking their masks off, and wondering why did our politicians not take any of this seriously? Indeed, why did our scientists not take it seriously? Why did they lock us all up when they clearly knew that this was not a lethal pandemic, which the numbers now bear out? And of course, as some of your viewers may not know, I finished my career as a chief executive of a life assurance company in the city. That was when I wound up. So I'm very familiar with mortality statistics and how all this kind of thing works. And of course, we still haven't had the real numbers. It's all fake. And of course, the insurance companies are beginning to say, and it started with Lincoln Life, I think it was in America, saying, we have the most extraordinary situation with excess deaths in the younger age groups. And of course, we are not discussing, COVID should be discussing the inquiry on excess deaths. We don't know why we are suffering such very significant excess deaths because any form of debate has been closed down. So we're not getting anywhere near the truth. The whole thing's a sham. But of course, you can go right back. You'll be too young to remember this. Yes, Minister, the Yes Minister program with Sir Humphrey and all the rest of it. All inquiries are sham. It's not a new thing. If you want to brush something under the carpet, you have an inquiry or a royal commission, better still. And you put some idiot royal at the top of it. And my goodness me, Ross, we're not short of idiot royals, are we?
No, we seem to be doing well for those, yeah.
So but no, it's a sham. There should be a real debate, an independent debate. And I tell you what I think will come out now, and I'm not quite sure whether it's going to happen, but I've got a hunch. The United States public are very litigious, and so many people are dying, young people are dying, and they are the master of the class action, the legal class action in the United States. And we have a problem at the moment, particularly in this country, but generally speaking, we catch up with America after a while, where people aren't joining the dots. You know, people think that their health problems at the moment are just a pure coincidence. And I doubt there's anybody watching your channel or my channel that doesn't know at least one, and probably a lot more people who have had health problems post-COVID and aren't joining the dots. And only a proper, serious, independent inquiry can tell us why that is. You know, was that delayed treatment from an oncologist point of view? Was it delayed treatment, or was the reason for that those health problems to come about because of the concept of mass medication? It's all been swept under the carpet, and until we have that, but I think what might come out are class actions in the United States in the coming year, where this won't be able to be swept under the carpet because there will need to be judicial decisions made.
I think, yeah, once again, the United States has to be our bastion of liberty in the world. Then, yeah, I think it's interesting just following like how some people seem to still miss the point of this inquiry, and as you say, the narrative doesn't become, should we have done it in the first place? The narrative then becomes, oh, look at what Boris Johnson put in his WhatsApp group. Look at how Matt Hancock referred to elderly people. And that ends up dominating the news rather than, as you said earlier, before we went live, why did these bastards put us in the lockdown in the first place then? But yeah, it's interesting. Now the narrative they want to convey is, look at all these incompetent doofuses, how many more lives could they have saved from lockdown, rather than what it should be, which is, did we do an efficient cost benefit analysis then? The lives that were saved, was that worth the economic hardship? Was that worth the delay in education? I'm a teacher myself, and now the numbers of children and the gap between the most stable and least stable has never been bigger. Was it worth the effect on our health? So the obesity epidemic has only got worse. I reckon alcoholism in general has increased since then. All these problems, as you say, people have not yet joined the dots. They've not yet connected this to, oh, well, the fact that we were locked down for 9 months or whatever it was, maybe that had something to do with it then. In terms of the death then, that's an interesting one, because if you look at their forecasts at the time, the SAGE forecasts were hugely overestimating the numbers of deaths, hospitals, and then, as we now know, they were hugely there's a misreporting at the time, the numbers of deaths, hospitalization, deaths with COVID versus of COVID. Do you think there'll ever be some kind of comprehensive look into why there was such a misrepresentation of the statistics, or do we already know the answer?
Well, I can tell you the answer. Of course, people who are involved in the interpretation of statistics or data, as I have been myself for most of my life, is that you have this problem of the mathematical linear projection, which of course was coming straight out of Neil Ferguson at Imperial College London. Now, the problem here is that this kind of interpretation of data is actually illegal in certain areas. Give you an example in financial services. If, say, for example, the stock market went up last year at 10%, if you took a linear projection, mathematical projection, and told your pension trustees or told private clients that if you project that at 10% over sort of 6 years, you'll double your money in 6 years, for example. That's illegal in financial services, because there's no way the stock market grows on a linear basis on a mathematical model. It doesn't happen. Of course, it doesn't happen with almost anything. There's almost no way that linear mathematical projects, which is why, of course, Neil Ferguson at Imperial College has always been wrong in his career. For his total career, he's been wrong. which is fascinating. Even a clock is right twice, a broken clock's right twice a day. So Neil Ferguson has always been wrong, but he was revered on BBC. He was on BBC once a week, saying that millions and millions of people were going to die, which of course was a complete fabrication. And of course, if you put in the difference between of COVID and with COVID, and of course you were dealing with old people who were dying at quite a normal rate of, let's say, 500,000 a year, which is the normal number of people you would expect to die with the population that we have. So none of that was done. And that's where the inquiry is just saying, how did they come to these panic numbers? Why did they start suggesting that masks were of no use whatsoever, as indeed now we know, everybody knows? There is no serious medical study that reckons that you can stop a respiratory virus with a mask.
And there's
It's
quite a few that,
ludicrous.
and there's quite a, sorry to chime in, there's quite a few that prove that the excessive wearing of masks have damaged, child speech development, other respiratory diseases. But yeah, a total folly. Sorry, carry on.
My wife is a medic, and her thesis on completing was on masks and the dangers of masks. And she qualified in 1986. We're going back quite a long time. So this is known, this is well known. There's been lots and lots of research on this. The last really big one was in Denmark, and they had to then modify their report. They said nobody would publish it unless you change this, because nobody wants to be left with egg on their face. So masks were a ridiculous waste of time, which, if you remember, for those people who remember, Chris Whitty actually said at the very beginning that masks wouldn't do any good. So there's a political sea change. And we all know the reason for that. They had to panic the population. You've got to panic people. And if they see everybody with these fearsome masks, it makes people uncomfortable, and it makes them start buying into the rhetoric, which of course was flawed from the start. So this inquiry is going nowhere. It's designed to go nowhere. And of course, no criticism of the press, television and press, who just simply didn't challenge the government line. And of course, we now know, and that came to the fore 7 or 8 months ago, that BBC 1, 2, and ITV, Channel 4 and Channel 5 had a big production meeting about a year ago, a bit over a year ago, to make sure that they all complied with the no criticism of the situation, the mass medication. There must be no criticism of this. There must be no question marks. You must not have anybody on who suggests it's a bad idea. No matter how highly qualified people like Professor Cahill, these very, very highly qualified immunologists and virologists weren't allowed on your screen, in much the same way as climate change. No serious independent climatologists are allowed on your screen to say that man-made carbon dioxide has got absolutely nothing to do with climate change, which of course is another huge scam. It's utterly ridiculous and ludicrous. But the bigger the lie, as Goebbels said, the bigger the lie, the easier it is to make it stick, especially with a whole generation, and you're a teacher, a whole generation of children who have been brought up not to think critically or have any form of risk analysis. So most adults now have been through, I would suggest anybody under the age of 40 has no concept and hasn't been trained how to do risk analysis or any of the other things which you need in life, particularly the medical profession. The medical profession is about memory. All the exams they sit are about memorizing things with an agenda which is largely set by the pharmaceutical companies and a highly politicized national health. And so consequently, your medics, your GP isn't the GP of yesteryear. He's a performing dog. He gets a biscuit from the NHS. The pharmaceutical companies give him a day's golf or clay pigeon shooting. And he puts out pills. He's got 10 minutes per client. He looks you up on the screen. There you are. Here's a pill. And if he sells enough pills, he does very nicely. And of course, the medication, the jabs that we had, he was getting, and now I think they're still getting for flu shots and all the rest of it, 25 quid a jab, which he doesn't even do. He leaves one of his lackeys in the practice. which is why they're all swanning around in bloody great BMWs, and they don't come out of your ill, and they knock off at 5. The complete destruction of the system of general practitioners now is completely destroyed. You have to go private. You know, I'm private. You know, of course I am. And anybody who is my age, who is reasonably well heeled, reasonably, not rich, but reasonably okay, goes private.
Well, that's the medical industrial complex for you then. It's interesting what you said there about the climate then. That was going to be my next kind of sub question. I read a paper from the House of Lords a couple of months back talking about lessons we can learn from the pandemic and how that can then be applied to the climate. Now, I called this, I think I remember seeing you call this relatively maybe in the, well, what did we say, June of 2020, about how these measures being used to combat the supposed virus that's going to kill us all are going to eventually be used to combat the supposed climate that's going to kill us all. Are there any developments within the kind of new climate movement in the wake of this COVID inquiry that worry you at all?
It's an interesting concept because it's very easy, I would argue, to frighten people with a virus, which people don't really understand the transmission of viruses. It's very complicated. The medical profession itself is not at one. There are very senior immunologists and virologists who don't agree on the transmission of viruses, or even if viruses exist and they can be segregated. It's huge. It's a huge subject of the medical profession because medicine is not an exact science. And probably never will be. We don't understand a lot of medicine. We don't understand how the human brain works very well. We don't understand anything. We don't understand all these things about medicine. Now, when it comes to climate change, of course, it's very easy. It's very much easier because if, when I was sitting on the Environmental Committee in the European Parliament, I was on the Environment Committee for several years, I put out a Charlie call, as we used to call it in the army, to everybody, all the researchers. There were thousands and thousands of researchers in the European Parliament working for different countries and different political parties, literally thousands. And I put out this Charlie call. I said, can anybody show me definitively any correlation between atmospheric carbon dioxide and global temperatures? And I offered a case of expensive champagne, if anybody could do it. Yeah, but bring it to me. Nobody won the champagne because there is no evidence. So you've got things like the Minoan warm period, the Roman warm period, the medieval warm period, the mini ice age. And if you look at the graphics, which are quite easy to check, because we know what temperatures were, and we know from ice cores. So we have all the technology to do that. You will find no correlation at all between atmospheric carbon dioxide. And then, of course, you look at man-made. The next thing is man-made, of course, which is 0.04% in the atmosphere, and it's tiny. And the British contribution to it is only 1% of that. So it's infinitesimal. It's infinitesimal. Even if you accepted the hypothesis, it's infinitesimal. So the whole thing is nonsense. Now, here's the rub. Here's the different thing. Frightening people about COVID or a pandemic, especially with the propaganda and fake pictures. We saw fake pictures of people dying in beds in Italy, which turned out it was all those pictures, of course, came from 2 years before that, an earthquake. So everything was fake. The whole COVID thing was fake. And the whole climate thing is fake. Now, of course, what you have now, and you'll know this, you have to teach your kids at your school man-made climate change, carbon dioxide. You have to teach that. And I spoke to at a public school some years ago, a physicist. He was Cambridge, got a first in physics. And I said, why are you teaching the kids? Because I was sponsoring something at the school. I won't go into the details of that, but I was a sponsor, sports sponsor. Why are you teaching this kids, which you know to be wrong? You know that this is wrong. This is ridiculous. And he said, I am paid at a public school for my kids to get straight A's and go on to university. That's what I'm paid to do. I'm not really here to educate them. I'm here to get them straight A grades. And when they go to university, they're after a 2-1. Whether it's Newcastle or where it happens to be, they're basically after a 2-1. So they'll tick all the boxes because they want to go into the city and get a job and be able to present a CV that does that. Now, it's very difficult, isn't it, to actually show, and it was given away by the King when he was Prince of Wales last year. He said, oh, you know, the world's going to die, the planet's going to boil, all this kind of thing. We need a military style effort to stop this carbon dioxide problem. He said, I've been banging on this for 30 years. Totally, ironically, beyond him, because I don't think he's frightfully bright. Cunning, yes, cunning like a fox, but not very bright. He's been banging on about it for 30 years. So when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? He's been at it for 30 years. And of course, people, when it comes to climate, can look out of the window. They understand the weather, British in particular. They understand it rains sometimes and it's cold sometimes, and we get mild summers and we get bad summers and bad winters and all the rest of it. And then you get more irony, don't you, when they say, this is the hottest summer since 1976, thereby explaining to everybody that what we have today is not unprecedented. You know, this they just told you that this happened in 1976, right? So they're telling you, they are telling you themselves that this is not an unprecedented phenomenon, and so on and so forth. So I think your average man in the pub, your average bloke, isn't buying it. Kids at school are buying it because Mr. Snooksy told them that it was going to happen, and they come back and they tell their family it's going to happen. But your family is probably the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, worse, a public sector employee who do no thinking at all. You know, that is really detrimental to your career, to have independent thought in the public sector, in any field, in any field. And if you do have your own views, you keep them a little bit stum. You keep them a little bit stum.
Well, I can certainly, yeah, I can certainly sympathise with a lot of what you're saying. Then, I mean, you know, I love all my colleagues and everything, but yeah, they pretty much just go along with the narrative, and I keep my feelings to myself. Now, talking of press lies, then I'm very concerned, Mr. Bloom, because I read this article from NBC News reported that the US and European officials have quietly begun talks around Russia and Ukraine peace negotiations. Then, now that really does concern me, because since this war began, for what has it been now, a year and a half, I've been told that if we negotiate with Putin, he will then move on Poland next and then take Germany, and then the dominoes will fall. Are you concerned as well, Mr. Bloom?
No, you've got to understand modern wars. Modern wars are driven by the military-industrial complex in the United States. As Eisenhower, in his parting speech in 1960, said, beware the industrial military congressional Congress. This is $1 trillion a year budget, the American defense budget. It's $1 trillion bloody dollars. And you've got the CIA with an unaudited budget of several billion. So consequently, you have to have a war. You have to have a bogeyman. The Russian Federation has no intention, no desire to rule Poland. This isn't the Soviet Union. People are having a big struggle here to understand that the Soviet Union has gone. It's gone. Now we have a Russian Federation who are interested mainly in trade. Look at the BRICS. Look at the development of trade. Look at China. They want to trade. They're not interested in world domination. Look at a map of American bases globally. They have 800 overseas bases all over the place. They have 200,000 overseas military personnel. Where is your imperialism? Where is your desire for war? Where's your desire for military expansion? It comes from the United States. That's where it all comes from. And of course, they fought this war in the Ukraine by proxy, which didn't start 2 years ago. It started in 2014. This is something else that people don't understand. This started when the Americans put their people in. They started to build up a NATO footprint. They started to move NATO further up to the Russian border, and the ethnic Russians in the eastern Ukraine and the Donbass were being constantly then harassed and attacked and killed by the Ukrainians in the west. to the tune of somewhere in the region of 14,000 casualties in the Donbass. And then eventually the Russians said, we will not accept the Ukraine being a NATO base for yet more American boots on the ground, more American missiles, in the same way that the Americans wouldn't accept the Soviet Union putting missiles in Cuba on their doorstep. And in the same way that they would not allow bases in Mexico or anywhere else. So this whole thing has been orchestrated by the industrial military complex in the United States. So that's how we got to where we are. Now, this war by proxy is being lost. And the criminal thing is that 2 years ago, or nearly 2 years, just under 2 years ago, they had virtually signed a deal, a peace deal. And it would have worked. It was perfectly pragmatic. And then at the last minute, Boris Johnson, at the behest of Washington, because he's just a Washington poodle, and I suspect paid very well to do so, he flew out and said, no, you can win this war, stay with it, we'll give you all you need. The deal was torn up, and that was probably in the region of 200 or 250,000 young Ukrainian lives ago. Boris Johnson should be at the International Court at The Hague and should be sent to prison for a very long time. He's dripping with blood on his hands. And he's a very stupid and greedy man, is Boris Johnson. And so why did he do that if he wasn't paid or there was some quid pro quo? Of course there was.
Of all the crimes of, I mean, as a libertarian, when he first came to office, I think we probably all were optimistic at the chances of Boris Johnson. I mean, he said some okay things in the past, then some libertarian sounding stuff, but you know, of the crimes of his dynasty, COVID being the second, I think the torpedoing of the peace talks is, you know, surely the first. You know, 250,000 Ukrainian and Russian lives lost
and
in this
probably
time.
Another 60,000 Russian lives as well.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we care about human life here, so, you know, whatever color or country you come from. So I see on this same article then that Zelensky, interestingly, is not ready to begin this dialogue with President Putin. He's come out several times and explained that he is opposed to further peace talks. And he's actually just got an article here. He has explained that he is still opposed to holding elections in 2024. Yeah, it's just not the right time for democracy, apparently. Can he carry on? Does he have the funds to carry on? Does he have the resources to carry on?
No, his days are numbered. The Americans have run out of ammunition. They've run out of everything. And of course, now they're funding Israel. And, you know, they can't really afford this. They can't afford either war, really. They've just run out of resources. But of course, you've got to bear in mind the people that are representing the neocons in Washington are barking mad. Now, I've been to Washington on any number of occasions. I've spoken to people at the Cato Institute, Heritage, Brookings Institute, people who advise government. I've met some of these people on a number of occasions. They are all in complete and total denial of what the truth of the matter is. And of course, nobody's going to actually say, my goodness me, haven't we made a terrible mistake? And if you look at the Biden speech, when somebody said, oh, can we carry on 2 wars, financing 2 wars at once, that speech that he made a few weeks ago, he said, hell, we are the United States of America. We can do anything. We're the greatest power. You know, we know he's ill. We know he's mentally retarded. Somebody wrote that for him. But the trouble is the people that wrote it for him believe that. They believe that. You're dealing with psychos. You're dealing with complete psychos. Believe me, in Washington, Washington is full of psychos. It's your average American, and I know America well. I've been to 32 states over the years. Actually, I counted them up the other day for a different reason. Your average American doesn't care really what goes on outside his state. He certainly doesn't care what goes on outside his country. So all this has been happening while the American citizen who they call Joe Sixpack, we would call the man on the Clapham omnibus, doesn't really care very much about this, because no American boys are coming back in body bags now. They were from Afghanistan, they were from Iraq, but they're not coming back now. It's Ukrainians that are dying. So generally speaking, your average American isn't that interested in it. Now, sooner or later, that will change. Of course, when the fiscal system, the dollar collapses and fiat currencies and their banks collapse, they'll want to know where the money went. Where's all the money gone? And if you add that to an open door immigration policy, you're going to see a huge turnaround. At the moment, it's a one-party state. Blue, red, just like here. Doesn't matter who you vote for, you get the same shit. So that's the deal. That can't go on forever. It'll probably go on for a bit longer, but it can't go on forever.
No, absolutely. I think it's the continuous funding of this war, the continuous support and outpouring of international support. Maybe it's deluded Zelensky into thinking that, you know, they can actually win this, but we've all said right from the start that this is just, you know, not plausible. I was reading something just the other day from a Ukrainian battalion officer, saying that we are running out of people. The quality of our reinforcements is lower every time. You know, the average age of a soldier in his battalion was 45 years old. So they really are scraping the bottom of the barrel at this moment. It is just going to be a matter of time before this war's over, and hopefully soon. So on the last topic, then, you mentioned about Israel. We won't get into the actual minutiae of that ongoing conflict then. I was interested to get your opinion on the response to it from the Palestinian point of view. Obviously, there's been protests breaking out all over London. I was up in London on Saturday and was kind of witnessed and party to some of these protests. It's interesting one. On the one hand, I recognise that some people there have legitimate concerns about Israel and what it's doing to the Palestinian people. However, on the other hand, it seems to me that there's a faction, I don't know how big a faction it is, of these protesters are made up of people who are sympathetic to what Hamas has done, are sympathetic to, what would you call it, an Islamic fundamentalist viewpoint and worldview, who don't seem to want to contribute to this country, who don't seem to want to integrate into this country. And so I was wondering what your kind of take on the protests were and the sort of reaction to the protests on the pro-Palestinian front.
Well, we have a problem here. We have now more Muslims. Okay, let's put them together. There's Sunni, there's Shia, who've always been at loggerheads, which are now being united by the Israel attempt of genocide in Gaza. So you're getting this feedback now. There are more Muslims now in Great Britain than there are Welshmen. The numbers are huge. So their power is on the street. They can mobilize a demonstration of 1 million people very simply, very easily. They can do that. We don't have the infrastructure to do anything about that. So consequently, the power is with them on the street. The flip side of that is the power, of course, with the Israelis, that the entire global banking system is run by them. So you will find that the Jewish lobby in America is so huge. Some people make the mistake, you know, suggesting that Israel is a sort of vassal state of the United States, as it were, or an extra state. No, that's not true at all. What the truth of the matter is that the United States is a vassal of Israel. And that's the truth of the matter. So look at what the tax situation is, which is an interesting one. I was looking at it the other day for a different reason. Israelis are taxed actually relatively lightly. You know, I think sort of generally speaking, 20% is in and around the figure. And so at the moment, constantly, every year, billions of dollars are poured in by American taxpayers into Israel, but they're not picking up the tab. Israelis aren't picking up the tab to fund what is in point of fact a garrison state. Everything is paid for, the arms, the barbed wire, everything that they do is paid for by the American taxpayer. So this is the problem. And of course, it's an insurmountable problem insofar that this has been going on almost since the Balfour Declaration. This is how far back. Some might argue since 1948. This is an insoluble problem. And I remember some years ago, Enoch Powell saying the problem that we sometimes have with politicians and so on and so forth is that they think if there's a problem over here, there must be a solution over here. Some problems do not have a solution. The one solution that might just feasibly work is two states, a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. The Americans and the Israelis have said no, 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 1,000 times no. That's not going to happen. And they're not going to be happy, the Israelis, until they've pushed everybody out of Gaza. And they don't really care. And it was very interesting what one of Netanyahu's ministers said, that, you know, there could be a nuclear option. We just nuke Gaza and kill everybody, and then we can expand even further into a greater Israel and clear everybody out of the West Bank. I remember in 1967, I was a young man in the city, and we were all fairly pro-Israel because we felt they were the little guys on the block and they were surrounded by all these Arab states. I think what's come to the fore now is this: people are beginning to realize it isn't as simple as that, that your fundamentalism in Zionism is every bit as dangerous as Islamic fundamentalism. They're twin sides of the same coin. And I think slowly people are beginning to scratch their heads when they see what's going on in Gaza, which is really just an attack on basically undefended women and children and old people. That's the long and short of it. Hamas is disgusting. I'm not pro-Hamas. They are pretty disgusting. But this is the situation we've got, and perhaps it's insoluble. And let's remember who started Hamas. Who funded Hamas at the beginning? It was the Israeli government. And they've bred a monster. They've bred a Frankenstein monster. They have sown the wind, to use their own words. They have sown the wind and they're reaping the whirlwind.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at opinion polls on Benjamin Netanyahu just the other day, and you know, you think wartime prime minister, normally you kind of get a big kick, don't you? So if you think George Bush, he had like approval ratings of like 90% plus post 9/11, like the highest any US president has ever got. But interestingly, Netanyahu is kind of getting a little bit of a kicking. Maybe it is because people recognize that, well, he's been, you know, he's King Bibi for a reason. He seems to be the prime minister on and off again, certainly throughout all of my life, and probably for a good chunk of yours as well. And this has happened on his watch, you know, this, and to add into it, you know, he seems to have partially funded and supported the creation of Hamas all those years ago. So it seems like people are going to be giving him a bit of a kicking. Now, do I think he'll, yes, I think in the next election, that could be an interesting one, the Israeli election. But I think
toast.
Yes.
I think it's toast. Another thing we must also remember, before we sign off, I'd like to make it clear, because I have Jewish friends. Not all Israelis and Jews are rabid Zionists. Most of them are just like the rest of us, just want to get on with their peaceful lives and do what they want to do with their families. They're not really interested in this sort of maniacal Zionism. But people get in control. People get in control and then they manipulate. And then it's very difficult for people to get out of the situation and come up with any form of solution. But now they've managed to unite Sunnis and Shias globally in the Muslim world, and also bring in Orthodox Christians, Russian Orthodox Christians, who are beginning to say, just, you know, this is the biggest lineup against Israel, really, and they've brought it on themselves. They've brought it on themselves, and no good can come of it. And of course, other people get dragged into these wars. I think it's a great shame that Great Britain can't keep itself out of other people's wars. Our borders are important, not the Ukrainian ones to us, not the Israeli borders, the borders at Dover. That's where we need to focus our mind. And we're not doing it. And we too will reap the whirlwind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Mr. Godfrey Bloom, thank you very much, sir.
As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.